All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Data Room. I'm the host, Jacob, and today we have a phenomenal guest, Mr. Harry Chi, founder and CEO of Motion. And he was a guest speaker in my Founder's Journey class a few weeks ago, and I was able to grab him on his way out and ask him to come on the podcast. So I'm super excited. Harry, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the viewers?
Sure. Harry, I'm co-founder and CEO of Motion. What we do is we help managers and teams automate their project management. Um, and yeah, I've been working on a startup for almost 5 years at this point. Went through Y Combinator in 2020, and then later raised seed, Series A. Yeah, excited to be on the pod.
Awesome. Yeah. So in today's podcast episode, we're generally going to be talking about how students can both start and succeed at startups. But before we jump into that, just the first question that I like to ask every guest is why did you agree to come on this podcast?
I mean, to be honest, I have never done podcasts before. Um, and you grabbed me when I was going home, and you mentioned it was gonna be short. So yeah, I mean, happy to spend 15-20 minutes helping out, and maybe helping some students out as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here. It's great to have a big name CEO. It's been through Y Combinator.
No,
I
no,
think
no, no.
that's
I'm not.
amazing
I'm not a big
experience.
name. Let's just be very clear. I'm nowhere close to being a big name CEO. Hopefully, one day I will get there, but no.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, like you said, hopefully you'll get there one day. I mean, you're definitely on the right track, right? So with that, like today you wanted to talk about specifically how students can start and succeed at startups. So why don't you talk a little bit about, what types of ideas you think student startups should go after? I remember in our class you specifically mentioned to avoid something like social media, and you were kind of talking about how, most founders want to do something that they have a lot of experience in, right? And social media is just something every college student has a lot of experience with, right? But you specifically said to avoid that. So I'm curious, like, what types of ideas you think are actually good?
I think it's not necessarily to specifically avoid social media ideas. I think the problem with college student is everyone wants to build a like help me find events near me like app. Like that there's a really good YC episode on this. I think it's either YC episode or article, I don't remember. It was like a Tarpit Ideas. I think if you Google or YouTube like YC Tarpit Ideas, you get that. Basically, yeah, like there are some Tarpit ideas that student founders love to apply with, that like finding events around me is one of them. I think note taking is probably another one. Um, and it's like I mean, Facebook was founded that way, but like I think the problem with a lot of student founders is they don't have experience outside of school. A lot of them don't have work experience yet. So they are kind of missing like 95% of like they're missing out on understanding 95% of the world's problems. Because they're the set of problems they have experienced is the tiny portion within your either your high school or your college life, right? So especially if people haven't done co-op or internships, that becomes even harder because you can't even imagine what problems businesses are facing. um I mean, obviously, like building like social platforms and note-taking apps, they can succeed, right? Like, like Notion is a huge success. Like Facebook is a huge success, etc. Right? Like a TikTok, Snapchat. So, but I think what I would recommend for students is if you don't have like work experience, like usually for people with a few years of work experience, the advice can be, hey, find out all the problems you have experienced yourself, or like in your previous job, and then solve them because they're real. But that doesn't really work for students who don't have real experience. So a recommendation can still be to try to solve problems for people around you, like maybe your parents own a business, or your parents they have definitely worked in businesses, right? Like um so yeah, like ask people around you who are very close to you what problems they have, um or even if you really don't know, like maybe go work at some places, right? If you want to build for restaurant industry, go work at a restaurant for 2 months. If you want to build for, I don't know, like whatever it is, just like go work for them. And as you are immersing yourself in that work experience, you start seeing a lot more problems.
Right. Can you talk a little bit? I know that's kind of what happened to you is like you first went into a job and then you went to make a startup later. And I know you were kind of always thinking about making a startup, but like, can you talk a little bit about the problems that you experienced and how that led to you building Motion?
Yeah, I mean the current problem and solution we're focusing on is really when I mean, at my old job and also when we first started a startup, it was a somewhat different idea. It was very real in that, coordinating and planning work for everyone is very painful. You have to use like you basically have to build up like projects and task lists, and then you spend like many hours a week just to make sure people are on track to finish. And when people aren't on track, you have to do replanning. You waste many hours for entire team on stand-ups, coordination, all of that. So to us, it was pretty clear this was a productivity problem. And we just started building solutions to try to solve it.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to ask you was like I feel like you're very big on like to come up with the right idea for a startup, you really want to focus on the problem. And I know that may have something to do with going through Y Combinator. Can you talk a little bit more about why having experienced the problem firsthand or like knowing someone who has that problem is so important as opposed to just like this thing sounds cool to build, so let's make a startup for that.
Because I mean, the latter is how like 95% of startups were founded. And the reality is like you're building a cool technology that no one ever wants. Like, right? Like I mean, like there's like 1 in a million chance where you just come up with an idea and people want it. Great, you might as well just buy the lottery ticket, right? Like yeah, the biggest problem for most non-YC, I think like the YC founders and the non-YC startups is a little bit different. I think the biggest problem for very early non-YC startups is they're not solving a real problem. Like they're building something like no one cares about.
And then what would you say is the biggest problem for YC early stage startups?
I mean, it's all kinds of things, right? Like it's like I don't know, go to market. Like I mean, it's still well, like just because you have found a problem doesn't mean like your startup or your solution works, right? Like the hardest thing for really like after like you have found a real problem, and this is true for YC or non-YC. This is true for all startups. The hardest thing is like actually building a good solution to that problem that people want to use, actually being able to solve that problem for a small subset of people who experienced that problem like very painfully. And yeah, I mean that process of iteration, very extremely fast iteration, that's the hardest part. And once you figure that out, YC always says, hey, you should get 10 or 100 people who really love your product first. Once you get there, you gotta figure out go to market, sales, user acquisition, like everything else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that before. Like when I was reading about the founding of Airbnb, it's like that idea, and they also were through Y Combinator. It's like that idea of find 1,000 users or 100 users that love you rather than 1,000 that like you. And is that, would you say that's mostly just to kind of like validate a product market fit and make sure that you're onto the right idea before you really try to scale it up?
Yeah. Like I would say like, like even 10 people who love it might be enough before, because the most dangerous thing you don't want to do is scaling a product before it has retention. Like
Right.
most products, like most solutions, you first try to solve a problem, the retention curve, like, kind of just goes to zero.
Yeah.
Like, and then okay, people aren't using it, and you want to figure out why and iterate on the solution drastically to get that retention curve to, like, kind of be flat after like a while, so that people are keep coming back and using it. And once you get that, then that's when you like you can start try scaling really hard.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing I really wanted to ask you is like in our class, you mentioned that you kind of always wanted to be a founder. You're just sort of like waiting for the right team and the right time. Can you talk about like your college experience and what you did as an undergrad to kind of best set you up for success now?
I don't necessarily think it's something I did in undergrad that set me up for success. And just to be clear, we're not a successful startup yet. You don't really become successful unless you have a big exit or IPO. Yeah, that. Um, let's see. Um, in college, I majored in math and computer science, which is pretty normal. Um, I did a lot of like quant research, quant trading related stuff. Became a quant trader after graduation. I think that actually had more profound impact on me doing like, like on me building a startup and very small early success, right? Um and it's it's like when you're working in a quant trading firm, you're very it's like you're focused on both the process and the result. Whereas at very, very big companies, corporations, enterprises, like a lot of times you don't see result for many years. And then you get too much focus, like you get focused too much into like, the things, that like the process. Which, like process is important, how you work is important, but if it like startup is all about result, right? Startup, you don't have 3 years or 4 years to wait until result. Like you might be dead, like you might just run out of cash, you don't have runway left. So I think that mentality of needing to see result on a weekly basis or even a daily basis is extremely important for a startup.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. What about like your network, like with your friends maybe, or like the clubs that you were a part of as an undergrad? Was there like a strong startup culture, like where your friends all like, oh, we're all gonna go out and make startups, or was it more just like you kind of just kind of held it within yourself then, and then as you kind of got a different network in your high frequency or in your quant trading job, so that like it
Um,
really ignited it.
I mean, really, except for a very few colleges in the US, the top ones we all know about, that have a big culture of student founders. Like most universities or like even most like Ivy Leagues is just like go to finance, go to consulting, go to tech, right? Which is like, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? I think that's totally fine, right? Like, lots of people go into like tech, right? Lots of people go into consulting and finance, and I think that's fine. People like, do whatever they like and love, and that's totally fine. Um, so I didn't really have a big group of people who were like, hey, I really wanted to do startup. I think that's kind of rare. Um, but what I will say is college is the best place to meet future startup co-founders.
Hmm.
And it's really the only 4 years you get in your entire life where you get to meet a bunch of really smart people and get to know them really well, maybe do some projects with them to see if you would work well together. without much consequences.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, like, like if you're a CS student, then you should start building like engineering projects with others. If you want to do a startup, like see who would be a great co-founder potentially. Talk about startup ideas with them. Like see who you vibe with. And if you're not studying CS, you will need a technical co-founder. So making friends with people who are technical is very important.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the boat that I'm in right now. I'm just a business major. I don't really have much experience with coding, but I definitely have a lot of friends in that department. And I know what you mean. Like, I think especially at Rice and maybe like some of the other schools, like there's a very strong emphasis, at least in the business community, on like investment banking or consulting.
I mean, that's
It's
very
like
normal. That's totally fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to do my part to get people interested in entrepreneurship. Like right now, I'm trying to raise an undergraduate venture fund, and I'm just always trying to keep my friends excited about like what's going on in the startup world, just to kind of keep that culture going. Because I think it's really important to have the right culture in place that sort of pushes students in that direction, right? I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there are a few universities in the nation who are just so good at that culture. And obviously they have very, very smart people, but but a lot of other universities, also have very smart people like Rice. Like, I don't think it's just that. I think it's they have intentionally built a culture around that, right? The normal ones, right? Like the Stanford, MIT, like Berkeley, Harvard, like they have a very strong and unique like entrepreneurship culture. Um, so yeah, I don't know what's the secret sauce. I didn't go to those colleges, so I wouldn't know. Um, but I mean, what I would say for you is you should probably take a couple CS classes, even though it's not like you're not gonna like might not major in it,
Right.
just to get a hang of it. And then by taking a couple of CS classes, you will also make lots of CS friends.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I have like I'm gonna finish my major by the next semester, so I'll have a whole year of time to explore some other classes. So I'll definitely look into that. Just before I let you go, there's a few other questions I wanted to ask you. One of them is how successful are you going to be?
I hope very successful, but I don't know, right? Like also like how do you define successful? Um
By your own metrics. And just to put it in a little more context, so I was just a little rushed, but this question it's from Peter Thiel, and this is a question that he asks people whenever they're kind of coming onto his team for whatever
yeah,
venture it may have been.
I I think my eventual goal is to have a very big positive influence on a billion plus people.
I like that goal. That's awesome. And do you think you're going to be able to achieve that?
Yeah, I think we could potentially achieve that with this with this company we're building in 1 to 2 decades.
Awesome. And well, I can't wait to see how it turns out. Hopefully we'll keep in touch. But just before I let you go, the final two questions that I ask every guest. First is what is one thing you want to tell me?
um Make lots of friends who also are interested in starting startups. Like, I mean, if that's what you want to do, right? If you never want to do a startup, then don't take this advice. But since it seems like that's what you want to do,
I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to make a startup. So
right?
definitely
Exactly.
that's my goal.
Yeah, and I would like you're in college. Like the best thing about college is that you have so much free time. Like, yeah, you have so much free time and you can really get to learn people. You should have very long conversations with people you vibe with and just like be like, hey, how do you think about this startup idea and or that startup idea? And then you can distinguish the optimistic ones from very pessimistic ones. You don't want to be too optimistic, but usually people with extreme pessimism aren't going to be great startup founders.
Yeah, that
Because
makes
to be a
sense.
startup founder, I think it's always like you have to be a bit delusional. So yeah, I think make lots of friends in college. Um, yeah,
Awesome. And then our final question is what is something you want to tell the viewers?
I mean, I imagine most viewers of this podcast are probably students. So if you are, if you're not interested in doing a startup, that's totally okay. Like, there's nothing wrong or right with that, right? Like, like it's like it's your life, right? It like, there's no particular path that's like, better or worse than others. If you want to be an engineer, be a like finance consultant, like, or like, like whatever, that's fine. But if you do want to be a startup founder, I would probably say, yeah, take some CS classes, make lots of friends, especially those in the CS department. Um, this is gonna be the best opportunity for you to meet your future co-founders. That opportunity still exists after graduation, but it significantly shrinks. So, and the biggest value of college is making lots of very smart friends who resonate with you.
Awesome. Well, Harry, thank you so much for your time. I know you got to run, but I really appreciate it. I'll get back to you whenever the episode's posted, but thank you for your time. I definitely learned a lot from just a short conversation. And good luck with Motion, man. You're doing some awesome stuff.
Awesome. Thanks. Really appreciate you having me on this podcast.